Hey everyone, so you probably already heard by now if you've been following AMD stock that in its latest quarter, it had a couple of segments that were growing phenomenally well, and it had a couple of segments that were declining. So is the business overall expanding or contracting? So I'll clarify some of those things and we'll go over the different segments of AMD's business and how each one of those segments performed in the most recent quarter and the prospects for how those segments are looking in terms of the next quarter and throughout. So let's get into it.
I want to thank the Motley Fool for sponsoring this video. Visit fool.com/Parkev for the 10 best stocks to buy now.
All right, so in total, we're going to go over four segments for AMD here. And the first one is the data center segment. The data center segment was one that was thriving. 2.3 billion in revenue in the latest quarter. That was up by 80%. In other words, a $1 billion year over year increase. And that accounted for more than 40% of its total revenue. So this segment is growing to consist a larger percentage of AMD's overall business. And that's good news because operating income in that segment was 541 million. In other words, 23% of the revenue in that segment. So a 23% operating profit margin is what you'll get is if you take that operating income and you divide it by the revenue in the segment, you'll get an operating profit margin of 23%. That's a very good operating profit margin. Going on, the client segment revenue was 1.4 billion and that was up even more, 85% year over year. But the client segment operating income was only 86 million or 6% of revenue, not as profitable as the data center segment. So this segment is growing faster, but it's not as profitable. It could be that it needs larger scale to generate better profit margin, but at this level, only 6% operating profit margin, which is not great. It needs to be higher. Going on, the third segment we'll discuss is the gaming segment for AMD. These are not just computer gaming, it sells computer graphic gaming cards, GPUs. It also sells into the gaming consoles, into Sony PlayStation 5, Microsoft Xbox, etc., etc. That segment is also struggling. Revenue came in at 922 million, which was down 48% year over year. Operating income in that segment was 151 million or 16% of revenue, an operating profit margin of 16%, which is solid, not bad at all. The year over year declines is troubling, but the operating profit margin is still solid, especially if you can generate this kind of profit margin when the business segment is struggling. That's impressive. Typically, when your segment drops this much, it's hard to generate profit because it's built on a larger scale. And so at this scale, it might be harder to generate profit. And the fourth and final segment we'll discuss for AMD, which is the final segment that it talks about, is the embedded segment. And revenue in this segment came in at 846 million, which is down 46% year over year. But operating income was 342 million, which came in at a 41% operating profit margin. This segment is the most lucrative in terms of operating profit margin for AMD. It would be great if the company can stabilize the embedded segment and return it to growth. Now, we'll hear more about the segment level prospects in the future in the later parts of the video, which I'll get to now. The company also highlighting that they have 750 million in debt that's maturing in June, and they say they have plenty of money to retire that debt using existing cash. So retiring that debt, it's not that much for a company at the scale that AMD operates in. It's hard to say 750 million is not that much, but when you put it in relation to the company's size, that's when it looks small. But 750 million, of course, is a lot of money. But the company paying down this debt will help reduce interest expense for AMD, especially now because interest expenses are higher, interest rates are higher. Instead of refinancing this debt at a higher interest rate, they're going to pay it down. I think that's a good decision here from AMD management. Now, going forward, sequentially, for the next quarter, the company expects the data center segment revenue to increase by double-digit percentage. And this is primarily driven by the GPU ramp. Remember, they just launched their new GPU, the MI300X. That's growing really quickly, and demand for that is soaring. That's where it's utilized for artificial intelligence, and it's thriving. That segment, AMD expects it to continue to thrive. The client segment revenue is expected to increase. The embedded segment revenue is expected to be flat quarter over quarter, and the gaming segment, based on the current demand signals, revenue continues to decline by significant double-digit percentage. So the gaming segment revenue will continue in decline, whereas the embedded segment looks like it's flattening out, but the gaming segment is still falling. Year over year, they expect their data center and client segment revenue to be up significantly, which those were the two segments that were already up, remember, over 80% each. And that's driven by the strength of their product portfolio. And then the embedded and the gaming segment, they still expect those to decline by a significant double-digit percentage. So the different forecasts they're giving you here, the first one we talked about here, sequentially means from the previous quarter. So from the third quarter to the fourth quarter, that's sequentially. Year over year is comparing the third quarter this year to the third quarter last year. Both are informative metrics to consider. For a company like AMD, I consider the year over year forecast more informative because companies like AMD, they have different quarterly, they have seasonality in the business. And so the first quarter may look a lot different than the fourth quarter. And nowhere is this more evident than a company like a clothing retailer like Macy's. Macy's gets a surge in revenue during their holiday season. So if you compare the holiday season to an off season, you're going to get a big difference. They're not comparable. You want to compare this year's holiday season with last year's holiday season to see how the company is performing. Are they improving? Are they getting better? I hope that clarifies the difference between sequentially and year over year comparisons. So going back to the year over year comparisons, which I feel are more informative, they say the client segment and data center segment continue to be up significantly, driven by the strength of their product portfolio, and the gaming segment and embedded segment to decline by significant double-digit percentage. So significant double-digit percentage, I think, is at least 15%, perhaps 20, maybe 25% could be year-over-year declines in these segments. I wouldn't be surprised if it's 30%, given that they were down 40% in the previous quarter year-over-year. And then the data center and client segment, they just say significantly. They don't say significant double-digit percentage. So I wouldn't be surprised if this means like a very large number, like 50%, maybe 75%, maybe even 100% year-over-year increases in these segments, given they were up by 80% and 85% respectively in the previous quarter, and given the surging demand from artificial intelligence, which is where these segments lie in. So I hope this clarifies the performance from AMD in their four segments of the business and highlights the difference, really, right? Two segments that are thriving and two segments that are struggling. And that's why you see this mediocre overall revenue growth from AMD, where, it is benefiting from rising effectiveness of artificial intelligence, but you don't see that kind of surge in revenue from AMD like you see in NVIDIA. Did you know that over 90% of the people that watch my channel are not subscribed? It'll really help support my channel if you hit that subscribe button. And oh, by the way, one of the benefits of being subscribed is that I take requests from subscribers more often than I do from non-subscribers. So if you prefer that benefit, please subscribe to the channel.